This is the Decades Artist Spotlight.
Northeast PA's 105 The River.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
Very well, very well.
Well, it's glad that I could hear you talk again because you've had such problems in the last couple years.
Yeah, man, I've been through it with my voice for quite a few years, but I'm doing much better now.
Well, I know I've played your new songs, which we're going to talk about, and your voice, it sounds spectacular.
Oh, thank you, thanks.
I mean, you couldn't even tell that you had all those problems.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we had a lot of fun making the record. You know, it took quite a few years, but part of the fun was that we did it independently of a label, and just the attitude was, you know, when it's done, when it's great, when we love it, it'll be done. So kind of took the pressure off.
It took almost a decade to make that album, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
And we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. I want to start, though, with the early days of Tom Keifer. I know you grew up not that far from us. We're about 120 miles north of Philadelphia. And
we're neighbors, man.
Yeah, you grew up right around Philadelphia.
Grew up in Delaware County in Springfield.
People talk about Los Angeles, the West Coast, but so much good stuff came out right here on the East Coast, especially in Philadelphia.
Yes, sir. It was a very musical city.
And when you were growing up in Philly, what were you listening to? I mean, there was so much to choose from. I know you're very blues rock oriented, but what were your favorites growing up?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, it was the 70s, and, when I was a teenager and learning how to play music, there were so many amazing acts. I loved the Stones, and I loved Rod Stewart, and Led Zeppelin, and Janis Joplin, and Aerosmith, and Skynyrd, and Joe Walsh, and the Eagles, and Fleetwood Mac. I mean, I could go on and on. Heart.
Now, I read a story about you, and again, this is off the internet, so, you could probably learn some stuff about yourself by reading things on the internet. I always find it out when I interview people. They find stuff out on the internet they didn't even know about. But there was a thing written about you that the way a Gibson Les Paul guitar basically set you straight when you were in high school.
Well, yeah, that's true. I wasn't the most academic child. I started playing guitar when I was 8. I just loved music from the time I saw the Beatles on TV. And, to get me through high school, my mom bribed me with, there was a local music store that had a very beautiful Gibson Les Paul hanging on the wall that she dangled over my head to get me to graduate high school. She said she'd buy it for me. It was the coveted thing that I wanted. I had like an Ibanez copy of a Les Paul, but I wanted a real one. So she knew how to motivate me, for sure.
And obviously it worked.
I still have that guitar, too.
It's all because of that guitar. And I remember, I was a teenager when Cinderella first hit, and one of the first concerts I saw, you were opening up for Bon Jovi. And we, here there's a place nearby. Nowadays we have arenas around and everything, but there wasn't a lot of concert venues in the area that I live. But the Kingston Armory, and you opened up for Bon Jovi there.
I remember the Armory. I remember that.
That was Cinderella in their infancy because Night Songs had just come out, and you were opening up for Bon Jovi. That must have done a lot for getting you exposure. Because Bon Jovi, was he the one who discovered you, or? Yes, yeah. He did a lot to help us get the attention of his A&R guy at Polygram, Derek Shulman. Basically, John was in Philadelphia, in Philly, and John was in town working down on Delaware Avenue at a studio called The Warehouse, recording the second record, 7800 Degrees. And he just wandered into the club we were playing one night after a session and came back and said hi and introduced himself. And we knew who he was because Runaway had been a hit, but this was before Slippery When Wet. And we thought that was pretty cool, this guy that had like a hit, had a video on MTV, came in and saw us, and he just, he said, hey, I dig the show, you guys are really cool, and left, and that was it. And the next thing we know, a couple of days later, our manager said, you really made an impression on that guy, John Bon Jovi. He went back to his A&R guy and was talking you up, and Derek actually already had a demo of us, and he was really riding the fence on it, and I don't blame him because our demos really sucked. We were pretty inexperienced, and basically what John did was he said, forget the demo, stop listening to that, go down and see them live. And so he did, and in typical A&R guy fashion, he still wasn't convinced and signed us to a 6-month developmental deal and
made us write more songs and stuff. And he eventually was convinced, and he was just doing his job, being thorough. But he eventually signed us to a full deal. So John walking in and mentioning, that he'd seen us, that was kind of the X factor. That if you took that out of the equation, who knows? It's a little thing, but it was destiny, I guess, or fate.
And those songs that you were, you're in your developmental contract, I guess you could say, were they the songs basically that ended up on Night Songs?
No, actually, hardly any of them.
So there you go.
I think maybe 2 of them did, and they weren't singles. It was funny because Derek, he said he didn't hear any singles, and our manager was saying, "What about Shake Me and Nobody's Fool?" And he goes, "No, they're not even going to be on the album, man."
Oh, great. There you go.
But, hey, that's an A&R guy's job, is to push you, to come up with better stuff. So I'm not complaining. It's just funny.
There's so many good songs on that album between, Shake Me and Nobody's Fool and Hell on Wheels, and Push Push is one I get a lot of requests for. Somebody Save Me, the title track. I mean, it's like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. That album, there wasn't a bad track on it.
Well, thank you.
From start to finish. But you were more of like a blues rock band more than you were getting lumped in with the the thing of the times, which they referred to as hair metal later on. But you got lumped into that. You guys were more like a blues band.
Well, I mean, musically, yeah, there was I'm inspired by acts that were inspired by blues artists, and I've even gone back, even as a teenager after I found out, my first exposure to blues was Jimmy Page, and I didn't even know it was called blues. I was like 15. I just knew I liked it. And then I realized that he got it from somewhere, and I actually started listening to like B.B. King and Muddy Waters and all these great blues artists. So, I think it's good when you can go back and really listen to things, go back even past the people who inspired you and see what they listened to, and interpret it in your own way. So I think that we had a very, authentic blues influence in the music. But, the term hair metals, that was more about the image than the music.
Yeah, it was.
I think that every decade has a look to it. The 60s did, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 90s. Every decade of music has like a fashion trend, and that was ours, and it got labeled. And we were the first one that had the MTV putting it in everybody's face 24/7. So I think
Still Climbing. I mean, it wasn't a big success, but I mean, it was another great album, and it was, it's often forgot about. And I guess that had to do with a lot had to do with the whole change in the music scene.
Oh yeah, everything was changing then. There was that broad weeping.
Don't even talk about Nirvana. That was that dark day in music.
Yeah, and that, hey, it happens about every 10 years, right? And that's, that's part of the business, and it wasn't fun to be, part of the dismissed group. You guys can go now, but that's part of the business, and the thing is, can you stay in there and keep swinging? And we always tried to as a band, and we've toured pretty much nonstop, and have had a very successful career even touring, and I attribute that to just an amazing bunch of fans that we have out there. Every time we step on stage, it just feels like the first time, every time. So we've managed to be able to maintain, and haven't really had the opportunity to get any new music out there. We tried with a deal with Sony quite a few years ago that really went south, and the deal ended up in the courts and a lawsuit and all, and that was kind of a bummer. And that's actually when I started my solo record, because we were tied up legally, and the other guys started working on stuff too. So
new CDs, the Way Life Goes. It's out April 30th. So talk about this CD. I mean, this was a decade of your life making this CD.
Yeah, like I said, it started on the heels of that Cinderella record deal that went south and got very ugly in the courts and lawyers, and we were all really excited about that, because we had, like we talked about in the mid-'90s, all the music trends had changed, and we got dropped by, Polygram Records, and we all went our separate ways then, and I actually started thinking about doing a solo record then and started writing for it, and that's when I moved to Nashville. And it all got put on the back burner when we got offered this deal to put Cinderella back together, and some real big wigs in the industry were, promising to breathe the life back into us, and and we worked really hard on preparing for that record, and went south. So we had, I'm just trying to paint a little bit of a picture there as to why nobody wanted to jump back in bed with a record company and real soon. So that was not a fun experience to be built up and then, end up in the courts and the record not be made. And it wasn't for any lack of our, on our end. So that's when I started the solo record. And I had tons of songs because I'd started writing in the 90s for a solo record and been writing for years. So started cutting the tracks for it and didn't want to produce it with a label, produce it independently. A very good friend of mine put the money up and said, whatever it takes, let's get this record right. And I co-produced it with my wife, Savannah, who's a really talented musician and artist herself and songwriter, and another friend of ours here named Chuck Turner, who's just killer producer and engineer here in Nashville. So the three of us were thick as thieves in putting this record together, and we started cutting the tracks, and one thing led to another, and it just 10 years went by, and almost like in the blink of an eye. It was that fast, and the other times it seemed like it took forever, but we just wanted to get it right, and make it right. So
I mean, your fans have been looking for something new from Cinderella or from Tom Keifer. What was the reason? I mean, I know you had other voice problems again. You were still with Cinderella, but it was just a point of you not wanting to rush it, or
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to describe how it went. We didn't work on it nonstop for 10 years. There was a lot of things along the way that took me away from it. I mean, I did probably 5 Cinderella tours during that period of time, which would take me away from it for 4 or 5 months at a time between the pre-production and and what was cool was we're working in Pro Tools, which is this format that's really cool where you can just step away from a project for months and come back and just hit open session and you're right where you were. So coming back fresh and objective, So the fact that I was able to do that, was a cool thing because I'd get away from it for a long time and then come back and listen to it and go, okay, well, now I'm fresh, now I'm objective, this is working, but this isn't working. We need to change this. We're going to dump this, and change things and fix things, and so it was a different way of making a record, but it worked. It took long. I mean, we didn't intend to spend 10 years making it, but that's just what happened. And probably the biggest challenge was the writing was a blast, and the recording was great. We had great session musicians and great players here. All that was fun. And then we got into the Pro Tools world where we were editing and working on the arrangements and affecting guitars and parts and adding production. And I'd never worked in Pro Tools before, and that was a blast. And it was also a learning process. So, obviously some time got wasted there going down some crazy roads and then backing out of them because it's a pretty creative format. And you can do pretty much anything. You can make a guitar sound like a kazoo if you want to.
Well, yeah, from the first time you started doing this album, 2003, whatever it was, to now, I mean, a lot's changed in how you can make a record.
Yeah, well, that's crazy what you can do in Pro Tools, in terms of arrangements and changing parts around even after the fact when you record them. Because a lot of times you're in the moment, when you're laying something down, and a lot of times that moment's great, and a lot of times only parts of that moment are great, and Pro Tools allows you to, if the drum part wasn't quite exactly how you wanted it in the chorus, you can take the live performance that the drummer did and create, the extra hits or something that you want, and it's really cool. And I was learning about that because I'd never worked in that before. And like I said, when we started it, we weren't in any hurry. It was just about making some great music, so we never felt the pressure of like, well, we've got a release date or we've got this budget that we have to be within. There was none of that. So it was really purely for the love of the music, and when it was done, it was done.
And this is probably going to be a stupid question, but, forgetting about the record company itself, just looking at the recording of the music, is it more fun to make one now, or when you look back when you were making, Long Cold Winter and Night Songs, was that great too? Or, how do you compare the two experiences? I know the technology is different, but the actual recording, it must have been hours and hours and hours in the studio back in the 1980s getting something right.
Well, yeah, I mean, we never, made a quick record. All the Cinderella records took 6-7 months. and that was working straight. You know, there were no breaks for objectivity. You know, it's like when we started a project, because you were on a time, you know, again, that was under the supervision of a label, and you had a budget, and you had, you know, you brought in an engineer and locked out a studio, and it was like, you've got from here to here to finish this. And most of those records took about 6 or 7 months, and we burned the candle at both ends working on it. Yeah, long days, and, you know, probably 5, sometimes 6 days and nights a week, you know, because you got to get it done. And that was what was different about this record. It was open-ended. And, you know, honestly, both ways are good. I don't want to spend 10 years to make a record again, but I did enjoy the luxury of being able to take 5 months off from it and go out on the road with Cinderella and just have a blast out there and not listen to a note of it, and come back and listen to it objective and listen to it fresh. That was pretty cool to be able to do that actually more than once during the period of time that I made this record. So, you know, objectivity is a powerful thing. You know, a lot of times in the studio, I can't tell you how many times you'll spend hours working on something and you just think it's the greatest thing ever, and then the next day or a week later you listen to it and you go, you know what, it's really not.
And you have to start all over again.
Yeah.
Well, the 2 songs I've been playing, Solid Ground and The Flower Song. Both of them have gotten I've got a lot of feedback on both of them. What about those? Tell me about those songs. How did you come to? Now you wrote both of those songs, correct? Solid Ground and The Flower Song.
Solid Ground I wrote with Savannah, my wife, who, as I mentioned, is a really brilliant songwriter. We wrote that one pretty quickly, actually. You know, songs come about different ways. Some just fall right out, and some take a little more time. That one, you know, we were just sitting around in the living room one night. I remember it like it was yesterday, with a couple of guitars, and bang, bang, bang. The next thing we knew, we had a song. And you know, that it's funny you mentioned those 2 songs, because those are kind of the extremes of the record. And Solid Ground would represent, to me, the more hard drive and hard rock end of the record. And lyrically, it's about, you know, life keeps changing, life keeps throwing curves at you, and you just gotta keep up. You know, it's not about arriving or finding the thing where you feel whole, because life's not like that. You know, I think we're all searching for that, but it's like the age-old saying of, you know, life's a journey, not a destination. Well, as corny as that may sound, I think that the longer I live, I think that's true, because you got to keep up with life. You know, it's always changing. So that's what lyrically it's about. And then the other track you mentioned, The Flower Song, that represents like the extreme, you know, end of the record in terms of the acoustic, more organic or intimate kind of vibe. You know, maybe shows off a little more like my Rod Stewart influences, or, you know, the Stones, Waiting on a Lady kind of vibe. Or Waiting on a Friend, I mean. He wasn't waiting on a lady.
He was waiting on a friend.
So that's a very different kind of song. And the album ranges, you know, there's tons of driving stuff like Solid Ground, even some tracks that are more driving than that. And then there's, you know, a handful that are more, you know, puts in that dynamic, or like The Flower Song. So, and that's the Flower Song I wrote with a guy named Jim Peterick, who was in Survivor and wrote a lot of their stuff. He was also in the Ides of March, and he wrote that, you know, that classic Vehicle, and really talented guy, and the 2 of us wrote that song.
I've been playing those songs since I got them a few weeks ago. I've been alternating them every week, and it's a good sign when they sound like that, because I mean, the comments I've gotten, people can't wait for the CD to come out on the 30th because they want to hear more. I said, this is all I got right now, 2 songs.
Yeah, there's a lot more.
I'll just keep on playing them. Yeah, the other question, and as we, you know, slowly wrap things up here, Cinderella. Are we ever going to hear anything new from Cinderella? I mean, it's been 20 years now since that last Cinderella CD. And I mean, this CD, when I hear Solid Ground, it does remind me a lot of, you know, the 3rd record with Cinderella. I mean, it has that blues type sound to it. But is there ever going to be a new Cinderella CD out there?
Well, we never say never. You know, I get asked that question all the time, and I know the other guys do too. And it's not for a lack of desire on our part. You know, we would certainly love to. We you know, we're a band that still gets along really well, and we enjoy touring together, and we're still able to ride on the same tour bus, and, you know, so, you know, the vibe with us is still really great. I'm not doing a solo record to leave Cinderella. I mean, Cinderella's still a really big part of my life.
That's the first question I've gotten. Are you leaving Cinderella?
No. But it's going to have to be the right situation. Nobody wants to make a record to just have it thrown at the wall or not made properly or promoted properly. And we've had a lot of offers since the one that went south in 2001, 2002, and none of them just really seemed serious, honestly, or anything we wanted to be a part of, or maybe we're just a little gun shy or have a bad taste in our mouth. I don't know. We're still healing from that one, honestly, because that, not a fun thing to go through. But we would certainly love to, and we never say never. If it's the right situation presents itself, we certainly would.
And you obviously sound like you still love being out there touring. Is there, do you still love playing all those songs? Did you get tired of any of them, or do you still love playing everything? I mean, Shake Me, you must have played, hundreds and hundreds of times since it came out in 1986. Is there anything you get tired of doing when you're on stage?
Yeah, we're definitely not one of those bands that's going to do a no-hits tour, because to me the hits are they're what changed our lives. They're what really connect us to, thousands of fans. And I think for the most part, that's what the fans want to hear. They want to hear the songs that they can sing and, wave their arms and that they know. And, it's a drag when you go to a show and you don't know any of the songs.
Yeah, especially when they have a lot of hits and you don't hear any of them.
Yeah, we try to walk the line between making sure all those hits are in there because they were so special to to our career and the connection to our fans and every tour we try to change up. There's room for X amount of album tracks and we try to change those around to keep the set interesting but you have to play the hits, and honestly I'd say have to, not in a way like, oh God, we got to play the. I love playing them.
Yeah.
They feel like the first time every time we walk out there because the fans love. Pardon me. The fans love them so much, and our fans. We've just got such a great fan base out there. Who have been so loyal to us, and we're so thankful for them. And they make those songs feel new every night. Every time we walk on stage. So who could get tired of that?
Absolutely, and big crowds. And every concert is good. I mean, I've never seen Cinderella where you don't look like you're putting 100% out there on stage.
Nah, it's a day that I can't put 120% in. I'm going to stay home.
Absolutely. And what's going on for the summer? Are you touring solo, or is Cinderella going back out on the road, or?
Cinderella's on hiatus this year. We made that decision back in the fall because we had toured 3 years in a row, States 3 years in a row. We went to Europe twice and South America, and we really burned the candle at both ends and had a great time and had some great shows and great tours over those 3 years, and we just felt like it was time to take a breather. So the timing worked out. It's a great year for me to put my record out, and obviously I'm going to spend a lot of time on the road promoting that. And we actually go out again. Our first show of the second leg is May 2nd, starting out in Los Angeles and working our way east.
Is it something that's going to take the whole summer, or are you doing sporadic dates here and there? Or?
That's sporadic legs, I don't ever do sporadic, like a one-off here or there. It's usually a few weeks at a time because I like to get rolling, and get in a groove. So we've got another 3 or 4 weeks at least on this leg starting on May 2nd, and then we're kind of, following the record, one day at a time here, one step at a time, and seeing what opportunities the record itself presents for us. So,
well, it's been a trip talking to you, Tom. I got to tell you, I mean, I'm not only interviewing you, I'm a fan. I mean, I feel like a fan talking to you. So
thanks, man. I appreciate your support of Cinderella over the years, and now for my solo record, I really do. And thanks for playing those 2 new tracks. It means a lot to me.
We're going to keep playing Cinderella. We're going to play more of the new music tonight, and I appreciate it so much that you joined us tonight. Tom Keifer on the Decades Artist Spotlight. Thanks, Tom.
Good talking to you, man. I think it really amplified it, or put the focus more on image than even the music. But when you listen to all the bands from that era, there were other, a lot of them had blues influence in them. I mean, Guns N' Roses did, and Tesla, and Great White, and us, and there was so many great bands from that that era, Poison and Def Leppard, and every one of them had a very unique sound and style. You know, I mean, Def Leppard and Poison are very different, and us and Poison are very different, and you know, Guns N' Roses and Def Leppard. You know, everybody was unique, really, musically, if you just closed your eyes. But somehow we all got lumped into this category that had something to do with hair, which was kind of ridiculous.
And it had to annoy you, and I talk to bands about this all the time. You know, you're out there making music, and, you know, a lot of them are writing. You wrote all the songs, stuff you were proud of, and all people are worried about is, you know, how big your hair was and, you know, the clothes. And
yeah. Well, I you know, obviously you don't want to hear that, but, you know, you got to take it with a grain of salt because, like I said, everybody got lumped into it, and I think all the acts I just mentioned were really great. Were great bands and made great music, and they were all unique. And there's a reason that they had the success that they had, and to kind of throw it all into this one thing that's, you know, in some ways is, you know, meant to be derogatory. You know, I don't think, you know, fans sometimes refer to it as hair metal, and I don't think they mean it in a
no, it doesn't
way.
Because
they mean it in a what do you, like a reminiscent.
Yeah,
you know,
it's their childhood.
Yeah, but more like the industry or the press, or, you know, they would throw it as like a dart, you know. And, you know, yeah, you know, you don't want to hear that. You know, it's like I always say, you know, shut up and listen to music with your ears, not your eyes.
Absolutely. And then your sophomore album comes out, Long Cold Winters, even better than Night Songs. I mean, Gypsy Road has become, I mean, it's probably become a staple for you. I've seen you in concert probably a dozen times, and there's nothing like hearing Gypsy Road live, and that song still sounds as good today as it did back in, you know, in 1989. But the blues influence was even more prevalent on Long Cold Winter with Gypsy Road and, you know, Don't Know What You Got. You had another big, you know, the ballad hit, The Last Mile, Coming Home, Fire and Ice. I mean, I go on and on.
Yeah. Well, that was a fun record to make. We were actually starting to know what we were doing when we made that record.
You didn't know what you were doing on the first one?
We were so green on the first one going in, and we were so lucky to have had Andy Johns, who, you know, actually, unfortunately, a very good friend of mine, just passed away last weekend. But we learned so much from him. You know, he worked with so many amazing. He worked with our heroes. You know, Zeppelin.
Yes, he did.
And the Stones, and, you know, you name it. He's worked with them, and we learned a lot from him. So going into Do Long Cold Winter, you know, we had a little bit more of a clue, and we had Andy because he produced that one too. So we had a lot of fun making that one, and I think we grew a lot, mainly in terms of the production and bringing in more instrumentation and creating, you know, just more interesting sounding records. You know, more color and pianos and brass on some songs and acoustic guitars and dobros and coloring it more. So and that grew even further on the next record.
Yeah, saying Heartbreak Station, you went all out. I mean, Shelter Me with the saxophones and everything else. I mean, that didn't sound like your typical, you know, as they would call it now, the hair metal sound. I mean, I don't remember many bands back then having the saxophone and everything else on their records. I mean, that
saxophone's like the most rock and roll instrument. You know, it's like I love playing guitar.
It always sounds great.
If I could play saxophone like Bobby Keys, I'd be just the coolest. And, you know, that record also, you know, when you say it didn't have the sound that would be associated with hair metal, the main reason is because with each record we tried to grow, not musically or writing-wise. We pretty much, musically and writing on all three records, it was pretty much the same thing. It was blues-based hard rock, but we tried to grow the production with each record away from the slick, processed 80s sound, which was more the flavor of the day kind of. You know, I just don't think that hard rock, blues-inspired hard rock should be slick, you know, and if there's anything that I regret about the first record, and maybe even a little bit on the second, is that we didn't mix it a little drier and a little rawer. I like that sound on Heartbreak Station. It's a little more classic, a little more timeless, where it's just very dry. But that was the sound of the times, and all the engineers and producers were going for that. So that's what happens. You know, every decade has a sound, too. But we started to inch away from that, you know, on Long Cold Winter, and even more so, we took giant steps away from it on Heartbreak Station, intentionally.
And Shelter, going back to Shelter Me, you're talking about next to a guitar solo, nothing sounds better than a sax solo. I always wish I could play the saxophone. Because when you hear people playing it like that, it's just incredible, and it sounds so great on that song. I mean, with the other songs, The More Things Change and Heartbreak Station, Love's Got Me Doing Time. I mean, didn't have to be a single, and that's what I hate is people, and that's what I try to do on my show is not focus just on the singles. And people want to hear just as much, the push and Love's Got Me Doing Time as they do, Shelter Me and Nobody's Fool.
Yeah.
They're the fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, on any record that, that's got big singles, there's particularly back, in those times, because the focus was still making a great record, not just a single, particularly for rock bands. And, we were fortunate that came up in a time where the industry still wasn't, it was still really vital, I mean, big budgets to make records, and, you'd have all the time in the world to work on it. And the focus was on not only just making singles, but a great record. So, there's a lot of tracks on all those records from back then, other than the singles that are, cool stuff,
And is that when you first started having your throat problems?
That started on to the end of the Heartbreak Station tour, about the last 2 weeks of that, like in 1991.
And because hearing your voice and talking to you, you don't sound like you sing, especially in those early days. Mm-hmm. I mean, you had that, I can't even say what kind of sound it is, that what octave it is you're singing, but I mean, you had that distinctive sound. And was that one of the reasons that you had the problem, because of the way you sang?
No, it had nothing to do with singing, actually. It's what I've ultimately, and it took a while for them to figure it out, but long story short, what I had, literally overnight, my voice just stopped working. It was just cracking and breaking. I couldn't hold pitches. And I eventually was diagnosed with a neurological condition called a paresis, which, layman's terms, means partially paralyzed. So my left vocal cord was partially paralyzed. And there's no way to fix it, and it's not caused from singing. It's usually caused, there's a couple of ways it can be caused. You can have a tumor that's pressing on a nerve, which they ruled that out. I had to do the MRI and all that stuff. And then the other way, sometimes in surgery, the general anesthesia can do it. And then the other way is from a very bad virus, like a cold or a flu, that lodges in the nerve and degenerates it. So that's what they attributed mine to. And once it's damaged, it's done.
Right.
You don't ever regain the movement that was lost. So you can't fix it with medicine or surgery. So they said, you're never going to sing again. People will get this, so you don't sing again. And they said the only prayer or chance that you have is you got to try to retrain the cord to meet the other one and do what it's supposed to do, and try and figure out, that's your only chance. And it's not an exact science. And it's taken me years, to really get it consistent. And it's a daily process of doing exercises a couple hours a day, and training and therapy to keep it in shape. So that's kind of the short story there. There was a lot of surgeries that went along the way, actually 6, to repair the what I call the collateral damage, because it makes you push and strain a lot harder with this condition. So I've damaged my vocal cords, like hemorrhages and stuff from straining from time to time over the years, and I had to have surgical intervention to patch those up. But the root problem is not something they can fix that way. You just got to train and hope that you can teach it to work properly again, which, thank God, I've found a way. It's been a struggle, and it's been hard, and it's been up and down, but each year that passes, the more people I work with, and I'm constantly working with new people and trying to learn different techniques and stuff. It's slowly over the years gotten more and more consistent, and I'm just happy about that. That's the silver lining.
Have you had to adjust the way you sing, like different songs? Is it?
Some of the old Cinderella stuff. I change a melody here and there live, but for the most part, I'm still hitting the stuff pretty close to the record. There's a couple notes here and there that are a little uncomfortable for me, that I've changed and kind of gotten into a different melody over the years on, but it's it's still the same tune.